Chapter 39. Stanley awoke in a meadow, looking up at the giant rock tower. It was layered and streaked with different shades of red, burnt orange, brown, and tin. It must have been over 100 feet tall. Stanley lay a while just looking at it. He didn't have the strength to get up. It felt like the insides of his mouth and throat were coated with sand. And no wonder when he rolled over he saw the water hole. It was about 2.5 feet deep and over 3 feet wide at the bottom, lay no more than 2 inches of brown water. Brown water. His hands and fingers were sore from digging, especially under his fingernails. He scooped some dirty water into his mouth, then switched it around, trying to filter it with his teeth. Zero moaned. Stanley Stanley started to say something to him, but no words came out of his mouth, and he had to try again. "How you doing?" he heard to talk. "Not good," Zero said quickly. This with great effort. He rolled over, raised himself in his knees, and crawled to the water hole. He lowered his head into it and lapped with some water. Then he jerked back, clutched his knees in his chest, and rolled inside. His body shook violently. Stanley thought about going back down the mountain to look for the shovel so he could make the water hole deeper. Maybe that would give them cleaner water. They could use the jars as drinking glasses. But he didn't think he had the strength to go down. He let alone make it back up again, and he didn't know where to look. He struggled to his feet. He was in the field of greenish white flowers that seemed to extend all the way around Big Thumb. He took a deep breath, then walked the last 50 yards to the great per- precipice and touched it. "Tag, you're it." When he walked back to Zero and the water hole on the way, he picked one of the flowers. It actually wasn't one big flower, he discovered, but instead each flower was really a cluster of tiny little flowers that formed a round ball. He brought it to his mouth, but he had to spit it out. He could see part of the trail he had made the night before when he carried Zero up the mountain. If he was going to head back down, he looked for the shovel. He realized he should do it soon, while the track was fresh, but he didn't want to leave Zero. He was afraid Zero might die while he was gone. Zero was still lying double over his side. "I gotta tell you something," he said with a groan. "Don't talk," said Stanley. "Save your strength." "No, listen," Zero insisted. Then he closed his eyes as his face twisted with pain. "I'm listening," Stanley whispered. "I took your shoes." "I took your shoes," Zero said. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. His, his shoes were on his feet. "That's all right," he said. "Just rest now." "It's all my fault," said Zero. "It's nobody's fault," said Stanley. "I didn't know," Zero said. "That's okay," Stanley said. "Just rest." Zero closed his eyes, but then again he said, "I didn't know about the shoes." "What shoes?" "From the shelter." It took a moment for Stanley to comprehend. Sly Levinton's shoes. "I'm sorry," said Zero. Stanley stared at him. It was impossible. Zero was delirious. Zero's confession seemed to bring him some relief. The muscle of his face relaxed as he drifted into sleep. Stanley softly sang him the song that had been in a family for generations. If only, the woodpecker sighs. The bark on the trees was just a little bit softer, while the wolves waits below, hungrily and lonely. He cried to the moon, if only, if only. Chapter 40. When Stanley found the onion the night before, he hadn't questioned how it had come to be there. He ate it gratefully, but now, as he sat gazed at Big Thumb and the meadow full of flowers, he could help but wonder about it. If there was one wild onion, there could be more. He intertwined his fingers and tried to rub out the pain, but he bent down and dug up another flower, this time pulling up the entire plants, including the root. Onions! Fresh, hot, sweet onions, Sam called as Mary Lou pulled the cart down Main Street, 8 cents a dozen. It was a beautiful spring morning. The sky was painted pale blue and pink, the same color as the lake and the peach trees along its shore. Mr. Gladys Tennyson was wearing just her nightgown. He robed as he came running down the street after Sam. Mr. Tennyson was normally a very popular woman who never went out in public without dressing up in fine clothes and a hat. So it was quite surprising to the people of Green Lake to see her running past them. Sam, she shouted. Wha, Mary Lou, said Sam, stopping his mule and cart. Good morning, Mr. Tennyson, he said. How's little Becca doing? Gladys Tennyson was all smiles. I think she's going to be all right. The fever broke about an hour ago. Thank you. I'm sure the good Lord and Dr. Hawthorne deserve most of the credit. The good Lord, yes, agreed Mr. Tennyson, but not Dr. Hawthorne. What that quacks want to put leeches on her stomach. Leeches, my word, he said. They would suck out the bad blood. Now you tell me, how would a leech go no good blood from bad blood? I wouldn't know, said Sam. It was your onion tonic, said Mr. Tennyson. That's what saved her. Other townspeople made their way to the cart. Good morning, Gladys, said Hattie Parker. Don't you look lovely this morning? Several people snickered. Good morning, Hattie, Mrs. Tennyson replied. Does your husband know you're parading about in your bedclothes? Hetty asked. There were no more snickers. My husband knows exactly where I am and how I am dressed. Thank you, said Mrs. Tennyson. We have both been up all night and half the morning with Rebecca. She almost died from stomach sickness. It seems she ate some bad meat. Hattie's face flushed. Her husband, Jim Parker, was the butcher. It made my husband and me sick as well, said Mr. Tennyson. But it nearly killed Becca. What with her being so young, Sam gave her life. It wasn't me, said Sam. It was the onion. I'm glad Becca's all right, Hecky said contrarily. I keep telling Jim he needs to wash his knives, said Mr. Pike, who owned the general store. Hetty Parker excused herself, then turned and then quickly walked away. Tell Becca that when she feels up to it to come by the store for a piece of candy, said Mr. Pike. Thank you, I'll do that. Before returning home, Mr. Tennyson bought a dozen onions from Sam. She gave him a dime and told him to keep the change. I don't take charity, Sam told her. But if you want to buy a few extra onions for Mary Lou, I'm sure she'd appreciate it. I'm all right then, said Mr. Tennyson. Give me my change in onions. Sam gave Mr. Tennyson an educational 3 onions, and she filled them on them one at the time to Mary Lou. She laughed as the old donkey ate them out of her hand. Stanley and Zero slept off and on for the next 2 days, ate onions. All they wanted to splash dirty water on their mouth. In the late afternoon, Big Thumb gave them shade. Stanley tried to make the hole deeper, but he really needed the shovel. His effort just seemed to stir up the mud and make the water dirtier. Zero was sleeping. He was still very sick and weak, but the sleep and the onion seemed to be doing him some good. Stanley was no longer afraid that he would die soon. Still, he didn't want to go for the shovel while Zero was asleep. He didn't want him to wake up and think he'd been deserted. He waited for Zero to open his eyes. I think I'll go look for the shovel, Stanley said. I'll wait here, Zero said feebly, as he had any other choice. Stanley headed down the mountain. The sleep and the onions had done him a lot of good as well. He felt strong. It was fairly easy to follow the trail he had made 2 days earlier. There were a few places where he wasn't sure he was going the right way, but it just took a little bit of searching before he found the trail again. He went quite a ways down the mountain, but still didn't find the shovel. He looked back up towards the top of the mountain. He must have walked right past it. He thought there was no way he could have carried Zero all the way up from here. Still, he headed downwards, just in case. He came to a bare spot between 2 large patches of weeds and sat down to rest. Now he had definitely gone too far. He decided he was tired out from walking down the hill. It would have been impossible to have carried Zero up the hill from here, especially after walking all day with no food on water. The shovel must be buried in some weeds. Before starting back up, he took one last look around in all directions. He saw a large indentation in the weeds a little farther down the mountain. It didn't seem likely that the shovels could be there, but he'd already come this far. They're lying in some tall weeds. He found the shovel and the sack of jars. He was amazed. He wondered if the shovel was sack might have rolled down the hill. But none of the jars were broken except the one which had broken earlier, and if they had rolled down the hill, it is doubtful that he would have found the sack and shovel side by side. On on his way back up the mountain, Stanley had to sit down and rest several times. It was a long, hard climb.